You can't even feed your kid. Maybe you shouldn't have had one." The words didn't just fall, they detonated. They sliced through the air like glass, sharp and unyielding, freezing time in its place. Silence gripped the buffet line. The aroma of garlic rolls and fried chicken lingered, but even that seemed to retreat, as if shamed by the cruelty that had just been spoken. The young mother stood paralyzed, her fingers involuntarily tightened around her son's tiny hand, anchoring him and herself against the tremor that shook her soul. Her shoulders went rigid, her breath caught between defiance and despair. Beside her, the boy looked up, eyes round with confusion and something else, something too adult for a child that small. He didn't understand the insult, not fully, but shame doesn't wait for comprehension. It crawled in, quiet and corrosive. Around them, people shifted uncomfortably. A couple exchanged glances, unease lining their furrowed brows. One man dropped his gaze to the floor, pretending his shoes were suddenly fascinating. The room, once humming with casual warmth, cooled as though the cruelty had turned the thermostat down. Near the end of the line stood a man in a faded polo shirt and an old baseball cap pulled low. His posture looked relaxed, almost indifferent, but his eyes didn't waver. Beneath the brim, his jaw tightened. No one here recognized him. But this was Jackson, the founder, the architect of the very space they stood in. This buffet was his vision, built from sweat and sleepless nights. In his mind, today's scene flickered and overlapped with another. 15 years ago, a cramped kitchen thick with heat, trays of freshly baked rolls steaming on the racks, laughter echoing off the walls he'd scrubbed himself. Back then, he made a silent vow. This place would feed anyone who walked through its doors. Hungry, tired, broken, it didn't matter. No one would feel small here. But now he watched a mother shrink under words meant to humiliate, not serve. The gap between what his restaurant had been and what it had become felt like a canyon, and this single moment threatened to swallow everything. Jackson stayed still, not because he didn't care, but because the moment needed to brand itself into his memory. This wasn't a fluke. It was a fracture in the foundation, and he was going to find out just how deep it went. Back in his office, sunlight spilled across papers scattered on the desk like breadcrumbs leading to a truth he didn't want to see. The quarterly report was open. Revenue, stable. But that wasn't what kept him up at night. It was the steep, unmistakable drop in return customers, especially in 3 specific locations. At the top of that list sat Fairove, a store that used to hum like a well-tuned engine. Jackson traced the decline with his fingertip, the numbers smudging faintly under pressure. Every lost customer wasn't just data. It was someone who once believed in his vision and chose not to come back. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a supplier, gruff, reliable, and loyal since day one. "I'm telling you, Jackson," the man barked. "I'm done if I have to keep dealing with Fairove. Their manager's a nightmare. Orders are a mess. Nobody knows what they're doing over there." The call ended with a click, but the echo of frustration lingered. Jackson sat quietly, staring at the papers. Something had shifted. And it wasn't just with Fairove. It was him. He had built something beautiful, but somewhere along the road, that closeness, that care, had turned into distance. Employees who once greeted him by name now saw him as just a line item in payroll software. And Fairove wasn't whispering. It was screaming. Jackson leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. The answer wasn't in the numbers. It was in the walls, in the hallway conversations, in the moments people thought no one was watching. He needed to see it, not the show they put on for corporate visits, but the truth behind the curtain. "What are you going to do?" his assistant asked from the doorway. Jackson didn't blink. "I'm going there myself. No one will know who I am." The room held its breath. He'd done it before, back when the company was small enough to touch. But this was different. Fairove had once been a crown jewel. Now it was bleeding out, and if there was rot in the roots, he'd dig until he found it. "This week," he said, tapping the edge of the report, "I want to see the real version, the one they hide from me." "You're going undercover?" she asked, half joking. He nodded slowly. "Nobody knows but you. Not a word." Something unspoken passed between them. A shift in the air, subtle but permanent. Jackson was no longer looking for explanations. He was hunting for truth, and when he found it, there'd be no mercy. 2 days later, he sat under the harsh glow of makeup lights. The artist worked quickly but carefully, dabbing aging lines into the corners of his eyes, softening the jawline, adding flecks of gray to his hair. Not too much, just enough to fade him into the background. His name was Rick now. His new uniform was unremarkable, a washed-out polo, khakis that didn't quite fit right, and scuffed shoes that whispered, not shouted. A plastic name badge pinned to his chest finished the illusion. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his stance. Shoulders slouched, walk slowed by imaginary years and imaginary aches. Even his voice dropped, gravelly, tired, a scratch like wind through an old screen door. Nobody would recognize him, and that was the point. By the time he left that dressing room, Jackson was gone. Rick had taken his place, and Rick was about to find out exactly what had poisoned the heart of Fairove. It was 5:40 on a Wednesday when Rick, pushed open the doors to Fair Grove. The scent hit him first. The rich saltiness of fried chicken layered with the buttery, nostalgic sweetness of garlic bread fresh from the oven. It should have stirred pride. Once it had. That smell used to mean something. It meant family, warmth, home. But tonight, it only reminded him how far things had drifted. The dining room buzzed with quiet energy. A family of 4 leaned in close at a corner table, the parents gently cutting food into bite-sized pieces for their kids. An older couple sat in content silence, their comfort in each other's company clear in how naturally they shared the space. A man at a window table scrolled slowly through his tablet while eating, the glow lighting up tired eyes. Everyone was lost in their own world, and no one paid any attention to the man in the worn polo and frayed cap. That was the goal. Rick was invisible, and tonight, that was exactly what Jackson needed to be. He moved into the line with slow, deliberate steps. Not the gait of a man with power, but one used to being overlooked. As he waited, he listened, not just to words, but to rhythm, inflection, energy. The clink of trays, the low thrum of quiet conversations, a child asking timidly for a refill only to be met with a barked, "Over there!" Each tone carried weight. When someone at the front asked about dessert, the reply was clipped and impatient. No smile, no eye contact. It was service by script, cold and transactional. Jackson didn't react. Not yet. He simply absorbed. Years in this industry had sharpened his senses to the subtlest cues. By the time he reached the counter, he'd know more about the culture of this place than any report could ever tell him. From here, Fairgrove looked fine. Clean enough, organized. But he'd long learned the difference between surface order and true care, and it was what lay beneath that he was here to uncover. A few feet ahead, a woman was digging through her purse. Her fingers moved with a frantic, rising urgency as time slipped away from her. A small boy stood beside her, clinging to her coat sleeve. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I thought I had my card. My son's really—" "Pay or leave!" The cashier snapped, cutting her off mid-sentence. Her voice was loud enough to carry. "This isn't a charity." The woman flinched as though struck. Shame flushed her cheeks. Her words broke apart, barely audible. "Please, he's just hungry." "There's a McDonald's down the street." The cashier, Krista, interrupted again. Her voice was thin, but sharp as glass. "Try them." A low, uncomfortable laugh flickered through the line. Dry, awkward, born of people not knowing where to look. The mother's shoulders drew inward. The boy looked up at her, still gripping her sleeve like a lifeline. Jackson moved forward before he realized he had. "I'll cover them," he said, his voice steady, deep, but quiet. Krista turned, her gaze slow and assessing. "It's not about the money," she said, lips curled slightly in disdain. "We don't need strangers playing hero and holding up the line." There it was, not irritation at the woman, irritation at him for disrupting the cruel efficiency she'd built. Jackson didn't argue. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his card, and handed it to the woman. "Get what you need," he said gently. "Take your time. Sit down." The woman's eyes filled, but she didn't speak. She nodded and guided her son to a booth by the wall. The boy stayed close, not letting go of her hand even as she sat. Back at the register, Jackson spoke without emotion. "Dinner, buffet, water." "Booth or table?" Krista asked without looking at him, her fingers already punching in numbers. "Doesn't matter," he replied. She slid the receipt across the counter without a glance. He took his tray and scanned the room. The far corner booth offered a strategic view of the register, the buffet line, the drink station. He moved there, settled in, and let himself disappear again. From this angle, patterns emerged. Customers approaching the register visibly stiffened, bracing for indifference. Krista's tone shifted depending on who stood before her, briefly polite to some, condescending to others, outright dismissive more often than not. There were no greetings, no smiles, just transactions. He didn't eat fast. He wasn't here to satisfy hunger. Every moment was a data point, every employee interaction a clue. His fork moved with mechanical rhythm while his eyes absorbed everything. The buffet itself told a different story. At a glance, it was stocked, but closer inspection revealed corners cut. The mashed potatoes had stiffened, their edges crusted under the heat lamps. The mac and cheese tray was nearly empty, only a gluey smear of cheese left behind. A young staffer emerged briefly from the kitchen, dropped a new tray without a word or glance at the guests, then disappeared again. At the salad bar, a woman in a blue apron moved with purpose. She swept the floor, stepped aside to let a customer pass, and offered a gentle evening that, unlike everything else tonight, sounded genuine. When a toddler spilled a cup of water, she appeared instantly, kneeling beside the mess with napkins in hand, murmuring comfort to the flustered mother. No eye roll, no annoyance, just calm presence. Jackson watched her longer than he meant to. There was a rare lightness in the way she moved, a sincerity in her small acts. She saw people, not problems. In a room drained of warmth, she was a single, flickering flame. Then came the old man. He stepped to the register with soft, unsure hands resting on the edge of the counter. "Do you have any sugar-free desserts?" he asked, voice quiet, hopeful. Krista didn't look up. "This is a buffet, not a hospital." Her voice was loud, dismissive, aimed to humiliate. The man's face didn't change. He simply nodded and turned away, his slow steps echoing on the tile. Around him, the line stiffened, eyes dropped. No one spoke. Jackson's jaw clenched. He had seen many versions of a bad day. This wasn't that. This was something else, rehearsed, repeated, an institutional cruelty wrapped in corporate efficiency, and now he had seen it for himself. Later, near the drink station, he found the woman in the blue apron. She was refilling the iced tea when he approached. "Mind if I ask you something?" His voice was soft. She glanced at him, cautious, but nodded. "Sure." "That woman at the register, Krista, has she been here long?" Her hand didn't pause in its task. The tea poured in a steady stream, but her eyes told a different story. She hesitated, and in that silence, Jackson knew. He was only at the beginning of what he was about to uncover. "About 8 months, Celia said, her voice low and cautious. "Transferred in from another location." Jackson gave a slow nod, letting the silence stretch. He knew when to wait. She's difficult, Celia added eventually, the words carefully chosen. But she's close with Greg, the manager, so… She let the rest trail off, but the subtext was clear. Jackson filled it in quietly. So no one wants to get involved. Celia gave a tight shake of her head. Not worth it. He offered a small, understanding smile. Thanks for telling me. She didn't ask who he was, and he didn't offer it. There was a mutual agreement in that silence. Some things are better not spoken until it's time. For now, anonymity was his ally. Back at his booth, Jackson pieced together the map of this place. Each moment, another puzzle tile locking into place. This wasn't just a bad hire or one toxic employee. If Krista's attitude had only been hers, it could be trained out or walked out. But the real concern was what protected her. When leadership turns a blind eye, cruelty becomes culture. He looked toward the register again. Krista leaned lazily against the counter, flipping through a stack of receipts, her lips moving in a comment too soft to catch. A nearby customer's face pinched in discomfort. Jackson leaned back. If this was the surface, then what festered below? Suddenly a tray clattered. At the buffet line, a teenage employee, his uniform still crisp with first-day stiffness, had fumbled a stack of trays. One had slipped, clanging loudly against the metal counter. Heads turned. Krista's did too. If you don't know what you're doing, just quit, she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. Don't stand there getting in the way. The boy froze. The dining room paused in collective tension. Mid-bite conversation stopped. A child holding a plate stared wide-eyed. The boy's face flushed a deep, fast red. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. Just untied his apron with trembling fingers and let it fall. It landed like surrender. He disappeared through the kitchen doors, the soft slap of his shoes against the tile the only sound. That followed. No one stopped him. No apology followed. And Krista, she just went back to her receipts like nothing had happened. Jackson followed the boy's path with his eyes until the door swung shut. The atmosphere in the room shifted again, heavier, thicker. Customers averted their gazes. Conversations shortened. The mood, already cautious, turned cold. Through the kitchen's pass window, a cook glanced up, caught Jackson's gaze, and gave the faintest shake of his head before turning back to the grill. The silent kind of gesture that speaks volumes. This wasn't new. Jackson sat still, letting the moment etch itself deep. The rot was worse than he thought. Rising from his booth, he made his way toward the back. The hallway smelled of fryer oil and sweat. He kept his tone casual as he reached the swinging doors. "Restrooms back here?" A man at the prep table nodded without looking up, wiping his forehead with a cloth. Jackson lingered. "Everything all right back here?" The man paused, then shrugged, still avoiding eye contact. "People are just careful." Then, softer, almost too soft to catch. "Everyone's scared of Krista." It hung in the air longer than steam. Fear, not of the job, not of hard work, of a coworker shielded by power. Jackson studied his face, but the man had already turned back to his work. No follow-up, no elaboration. The kind of silence born not from ignorance, but from self-preservation. As Jackson stepped aside to let a cook pass with a tray of bread, he noted the man's eyes stayed down, footsteps careful. The kitchen wasn't humming with focus. It was quiet with tension, like a storm was always just a sentence away. Back in the dining room, his gaze immediately found the salad bar. Celia again, moving with calm, unhurried rhythm, her attention divided between cleanliness and care. Just then, a child tilted his plate too far. A small mountain of food spilled across the floor. Some guests turned, curious. Celia didn't flinch. She moved in instantly, soft, confident, unbothered. She gently guided the boy back, crouched down, and cleaned the spill with ease. No scolding, no theatrics, just kindness. The boy's mother looked up, expecting judgment. Instead, she got a smile. And that smile, it mattered. It lasted less than a minute, but Jackson felt it more than anything else that night. Her presence wasn't performative. Her care wasn't calculated. She did the job like it meant something. And maybe, just maybe, it still could. He found her again clearing a table by the window. He approached slowly, not to startle. "How long has Krista been here?" he asked. Celia straightened. "About 8 months. She transferred from another branch." Jackson nodded, like it was just a passing question. But he let a beat pass, then asked, "Has anyone ever complained?" Her pause was answer enough. She set the plates down, voice low. "Yeah, a few, but nothing happens. Greg, the manager, he's close with her, so it just disappears." Her eyes shifted toward the register where Krista now stood, laughing with another staff member like nothing had ever happened. Then she returned to wiping the table. Her face stayed neutral, but her voice had carried that familiar blend of frustration and resignation. "Thank you," Jackson said. Celia gave a soft nod and returned to work. She didn't ask why he cared. That silence said everything. Here, asking questions was dangerous. Around here, trouble found you faster than truth. As he stepped away, Jackson's mind moved ahead of him. This wasn't about one employee. It was about a network of silence and protection. And if Greg had allowed this rot to spread, then Greg was where the chain would break. Jackson gathered his tray, slid it onto the busing cart, and walked toward the exit. As he passed the register, he slowed. "You know," he said quietly, not breaking stride, "one day, if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, you might lose more than just a job." Krista's eyes flicked up. "Is that a threat?" "No," Jackson said, cool as steel. "Just a reminder." Their eyes locked. The silence was sharp. Then he moved on, the door swinging open to the cool night. Outside, his pulse thudded, not from fear, but from clarity. Tonight he had seen enough. Too much. The boy who walked out. The old man humiliated, the mother shamed. Celia, working hard in a place that didn't deserve her. Doing nothing now would make him complicit. He pulled out his phone and called. The line clicked. "I need the full employee roster for Fairgrove," he said, "and I want every transfer file, especially Krista's." There was a pause. "Everything okay?" his assistant asked. "It will be," Jackson said, his eyes set on the glowing street ahead. He ended the call. The decision was no longer forming. It was made. Tomorrow, he would begin pulling at the threads, and this time, no disguises. That night, sleep didn't come. Jackson lay motionless in the dark, eyes open to the ceiling, the night playing back every detail like a film he couldn't pause. Krista's voice, sharp and venom-laced. The boy's confused, wounded eyes. The mother, face flushed, retreating with a dignity she didn't deserve to have to defend. Jackson had been in business long enough to know the occasional bad hire was part of the equation. But this was something darker, and the worst part, it had grown under his roof, under his silence. 15 years ago, he could walk into any one of his restaurants and call every dishwasher by name. He remembered their birthdays, their stories, their kids' favorite sports teams. Back then, leadership wasn't a title, it was a presence. Culture didn't need to be enforced, it was lived. Now, lying in that still room, the truth crashed over him like a cold wave. He couldn't even name the manager of his third highest performing location. Somewhere between scaling the business and sustaining it, he had handed off too much trust to people who had stopped earning it. The layers of middle management had thickened, and behind those layers, something had spoiled. The guilt pressed into his chest like weight he couldn't shift. But beneath it, something else stirred. Resolve. This wouldn't be solved with a memo. Not a Zoom call, not a new training video. The problem wasn't logistical, it was cultural. And culture wasn't fixed from a distance. It had to be rebuilt face to face. By morning, the report was in his inbox. Just a plain email. No headlines. But it carried the weight of every suspicion he'd carried since stepping into Fair Grove. Jackson opened the staff roster first. Krista's file was clean, too clean. The transfer papers bore Greg's signature. No notes, no warnings. On paper, she was a model employee, but buried in archived entries from her previous location, Jackson found the truth Greg had buried. Abrasive, hostile, repeatedly dismissive toward guests. Each note more damning than the last. None of it had reached corporate. None of it had seen daylight. Greg hadn't dropped the ball. He'd hidden it. Then Jackson searched for another name, Celia. Her file was thin, almost insultingly so. No promotions, no acknowledgments. Yet the customer feedback log painted a different picture entirely. Over and over, her name surfaced, warm and helpful. Made our evening better. Handled a spill with grace. Excellence in plain sight. Ignored. A toxic voice elevated. A quiet one erased. It told Jackson all he needed to know about the culture Greg had been building. It wasn't an oversight. It was a failure of values. He closed the laptop. The decision had crystallized. Fair Grove hadn't just broken. It had been allowed to. By late afternoon, Jackson returned to Fair Grove, not as Rick, the ghost, but as himself. No cap, no polo, just a dark blazer, pressed jeans, a steady step. He walked through the dining room like a man reclaiming what was his. From the salad bar, Celia looked up. Their eyes met, brief, sharp. But she didn't break stride. She didn't need to. She understood more than most people who'd worked under his name. Jackson didn't stop at the register, didn't glance at the buffet. He walked straight to the narrow hallway that led to the back office. The hum of the restaurant faded behind him as he pushed the door open. Inside, Greg looked up from a clipboard and froze. "Jackson," he said, half rising from his chair, the name landing awkwardly, half relieved, half afraid. Jackson didn't waste breath. "I need 15 minutes, he said, his tone flat, immovable. Greg gestured stiffly to a chair. "Of course." But Jackson didn't sit. The room was tight. The air was tight. And for the first time in months, Greg had to face the man whose name was printed on every sign out front. Jackson's stare didn't waver. "How's this place running?" Greg leaned back, trying casual. "Numbers are steady. Staffing's been a little—" "I didn't ask about numbers," Jackson cut in. "I asked about culture." The word hung there. Sharp. Heavy. Greg hesitated. "It's been a challenge. Labor pools are thin. Hard to find the right people." "Then explain this," Jackson said. "Explain why Krista thought it was acceptable to humiliate a woman in front of her child, and a line full of customers." Greg blinked. "I wasn't aware." "You didn't ask," Jackson said, the edge in his voice slicing the room in half. Greg fumbled for words, but Jackson had already moved on. "It stops today. Effective immediately. Krista's off the register. Reassign her to kitchen prep if you have to, but she doesn't speak to another guest until HR finishes a full review." Greg gave a tight nod. "Understood." Jackson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We're not in the business of making people regret walking through our doors. You want to keep running this place? Then you lead like it matters, starting now." Greg didn't look away. "I will," he said. "Good," Jackson replied. "Because I'm watching." Then he added calmly, "And tell me, why hasn't Celia been recognized?" Greg frowned. "She's just a floor worker. Reliable, sure, but—" "She's the reason people come back," Jackson cut in. "Yesterday, I watched her. Not one guest left without feeling welcome. That's value, and we don't ignore value." Greg nodded, quieter now. "I can bring her in, introduce—" "No," Jackson said. "Tell her someone from corporate wants a check-in. Keep it simple." A moment later, the door clicked open. Celia entered, apron neatly tied. A quiet sheen of sweat on her collar from honest work. Her eyes moved between the men quickly, her read swift. She was alert, but not afraid. Calm, but ready. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Jackson nodded to the chair. "How long have you been here?" 7 months, she said. He nodded again. "Do you like it?" She hesitated. "I like the customers, but sometimes it feels like we're just tolerated, like we're in the way." He leaned forward. "Who makes you feel that way?" She looked down, then met his eyes. "Krista. And it's not just customers. Staff, too. You're late by a minute? Forget something? She makes it a performance. Why hasn't it been reported?" Her eyes flicked to the door, then back. "She's close with Greg, or acts like she is. So people don't bother. Nothing changes." Jackson's jaw clenched. Each word reinforced what he already knew. "And yet, you've stayed. I need the hours, and the schedule works with my kids' school. I don't quit easy." He let that settle. She wasn't just competent, she was committed. "Yesterday," he said, "I saw you doing far more than your position requires." Her brow lifted. "Wait, you were that customer?" "I was," he confirmed. Her expression shifted. Surprise, then understanding. "You were watching me?" "I was, and I saw how you handled situations most people would have avoided." She paused, uncertain if it was praise or a test. Then Jackson asked, casually but clear, "How often have you been late?" "Once," Celia replied without pause. "My youngest had a fever. I called ahead." Jackson's expression softened. Not a smile, exactly, but the subtle lift at the corner of his mouth carried weight. Approval, quiet and earned. In that moment, something shifted between them. Trust didn't need grand gestures, just truth spoken plainly and heard. Celia now knew she wasn't just talking to another corporate suit, and Jackson knew she wasn't someone who made excuses. She showed up, even when it was hard. Especially then. The air between them stilled, warmer, lighter. "Ever thought about being a manager?" Jackson asked. Celia blinked, taken off guard. "I don't have the experience," she said quickly, almost reflexively. "You do," he replied. "You've already been doing the job, you just haven't had the title." Her eyes searched his, cautious, not from doubt in herself, but in whether or not to believe this was real. How many promises had she heard before? How many were empty? "What if I offered you team lead?" Jackson continued. "Higher pay, same schedule, you'll still be there for your kids. Would you take it?" Celia didn't hesitate. "I would, but I won't cover for laziness, and I won't look the other way." "That," Jackson said, "is exactly why I'm asking you." Her shoulders relaxed, not from relief, but from recognition. The kind that comes when someone finally sees what you've been carrying all along. She hadn't needed permission to lead, just a space where it was allowed. Jackson could feel it in his bones. The tide was turning, and not because of policy or procedure, but because of people like Celia who refused to look away. "Get the paperwork done today," he told Greg, who had quietly re-entered the room. His tone left no room for delay. Greg gave a stiff nod, tension still written into his spine. But something in his posture had changed. Not defeat, but the first steps toward accountability. "This," Jackson said, gesturing toward the small office and the larger restaurant beyond, "is a second chance. For you." For this store, Greg's gaze dropped, the message landing where it needed to. "1 month," Jackson added. "If this place hasn't changed, I'll change the people running it." There was no rebuttal, just the quiet understanding of a man being told the last door was swinging open. Jackson stepped back onto the floor. The scent of fresh rolls drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the light hum of conversation. For the first time since he'd entered Grove, he didn't feel a knot forming in his chest. It wasn't relief, it was something sharper, the kind of hope that came tethered to a deadline. It asked for action, not promises. Greg now stationed himself at the register during peak hours. His tone, respectful. His posture, present. No longer hiding behind systems, but setting the example himself. Krista had been reassigned to kitchen prep. Her face stayed unreadable, her movements robotic. She didn't once glance toward the dining area, as if it had become a country she'd been exiled from. And maybe, in some ways, it had. Meanwhile, Celia stepped into her new role like it had always belonged to her. Not loudly, not proudly, just steadily. A young new hire followed behind her one afternoon, still awkward, tray tilted slightly in trembling hands. Celia guided him with quiet grace. "Hold it from the middle," she said, demonstrating. "Smile when you greet someone. They'll feel it more than the food." The air inside Fairgrove felt different. It breathed again. Guests lingered longer. Conversations sounded fuller. Even the notes on receipts changed. Staff seemed happier. "We'll be back." Each morning, Jackson received reports. Feedback scores ticking upward, turnover slowing. Nothing dramatic, but all of it moving in the right direction. Still, he remained alert. Because he knew better than most, progress is delicate. Culture isn't changed in a meeting. It's defended in 1,000 small moments. 3 weeks later, Jackson returned. The difference was immediate. The brittle quiet from his first visit had been replaced with something richer. Conversations flowed. Laughter rose from a family near the windows. The scent of fresh bread hung gently in the air. Every table clean, every counter gleaming. Celia moved through the dining room with quiet command, her eyes alert but unhurried. She greeted a family with calm assurance. Greg stood at the register, not smiling out of obligation, but out of something simpler, respect. "Welcome in," he said. Not cheerful, not forced, just right. Jackson passed through the dining room, unrecognized, and that was perfect. The place didn't need his presence to hold itself steady anymore. And then the door opened. A woman entered, holding the hand of a boy. Jackson froze. He knew those eyes, wide, curious. The boy from that first night. Only now, those eyes weren't filled with shame or uncertainty. They were open. Celia greeted them first. She crouched slightly to the boy's height, offering him a cold glass of orange juice. "For you," she said, like it was a secret gift. The boy's smile was full and free. No hesitation. He looked to his mother for permission before taking a sip. She gave Celia a nod, silent but full of gratitude. Jackson watched from across the room, and in the overlap of memory and this new moment, he felt the story arc bend back toward grace. No cutting words, no retreat, just kindness restored. The repair had begun. At the salad bar, Jackson spotted another familiar face, one of the younger hires who had once fumbled trays like they were made of glass. Now, he worked the station with confidence, cracking a light joke with guests as he plated their food. The customers laughed, thanked him, moved on smiling. That ease rippled outward. Even in the natural chaos of a dinner rush, the energy felt collected. Alive, like everyone belonged here again. From the register, Greg's eyes scanned the room, watchful, steady. He stepped in when lines formed, nodded to staff when service bottlenecked. No longer detached. He was leading. And across the room, Celia adjusted trays, realigned serving spoons, called calmly for a refill. Everything moved like it had rhythm now, not because someone was barking orders, but because everyone understood the beat. Jackson stepped into a side room and asked quietly for Celia. When she arrived, her face flushed from steady movement, Jackson didn't waste time. "You've kept this place steady," he said, not as praise, but recognition. Celia smiled softly. "We're still short-staffed. Some shifts hit hard." "I know," he replied. "You'll have an assistant next weekend, someone to take some of the weight." The breath she let out was faint, but filled with something she hadn't let herself feel before: relief. "You've earned it. Your job now is to protect this culture. I'll take care of the rest." She nodded. "And if it ever gets too heavy, you tell me." "That's all I ask," he replied. They stood for a moment in that room, the muffled clink of plates and laughter echoing faintly behind the closed door. A small pause, but a powerful one. Change wasn't about noise. It was about intention. Sustained. Protected. When Jackson stepped out, Greg met him. "Krista turned in her resignation," he said simply. "No explanation, no scene." Jackson nodded once. "I should have seen it sooner," Greg added, his voice low. "What matters," Jackson said, "is that you see it now." Greg nodded and returned to the register. No ceremony, just ownership. The tension that had once infected Fair Grove had lifted. In its place was space for better voices, steadier hands, and leadership that didn't need to shout. Jackson moved slowly through the dining room. An elderly couple shared dessert at one table, laughing in low whispers. Nearby, a child topped his ice cream with bright candy pieces, eyes lighting up with color. The sounds of the place weren't just noise. They were a heartbeat, steady and real. The scent of fresh rolls drifted through from the kitchen. And Jackson remembered. 15 years ago, in a place just like this, he had watched people linger because it felt like home. Now, standing here, watching a server refill coffee without being asked, hearing a guest wave goodbye to Greg with a smile, he realized the heart of this place hadn't died. It had simply needed room to return. At the front doors, sunlight spilled in warm and golden across his face. A thought surfaced. Leadership isn't about showing up when it's easy. It's about stepping into the broken spaces and staying until they heal. But Jackson didn't say it. He didn't need to. He stepped down into the light, just as the door opened behind him. A new guest entered, the faint shuffle of their feet absorbed into the hum of warmth behind him. Celia's voice rang out, clear and welcoming. "Hi there. We're glad you're here." Jackson didn't turn back. He didn't need to. The sound told him everything. This place could stand. And this time, it would.